All right, so this is for Biology 3101C. We're going to just do a little introductory session just regarding some of the terms you're going to see a lot in this course. You're going to do some work with Punnett squares and genetics, of course, but you will see some terms over and over again. So I think the first thing we need to discuss is the term genotype. So a genotype is basically a two-letter combination that a person has that designates a trait within their genes. For example, and the letters are kind of arbitrary. It doesn't really matter what letters we pick, but they always have to have two. So for example, a person with brown eyes has two letters. In this case, they're both big B's. So I know that brown eyes are dominant over blue. So this person has a genotype that fits with brown eyes. And that kind of leads into the next term you're going to see a lot. So you'll see genotype, and they'll ask for genotypic ratios, but basically they're asking you to give the two-letter or four-letter when you get a little bit further with the dihybrid crosses. They're going to be asking you to give the two-letter combinations, and that's how you describe the genotype. So after genotype, we have something called phenotype. So I like to remember the sound pheno for physical. So the phenotype is the physical trait. So in this case, this genotype is two big B's, so that is a brown-eyed person. So when you're asked to describe the phenotype, you're actually saying what they physically look like, whether they're tall, short, or round or wrinkled in the case of the P's that we're going to get into. Okay, so that's genotype and phenotype, and you'll be asked to give ratios a lot, and I'll show you a little bit about that when I do an example. So the next terms you're going to see a lot are homozygous versus heterozygous. So if you can remember that homozygous means the same and hetero means different, that will really help. So basically, a person that is homozygous for a trait, it means that they have two of the exact same alleles, and genotypes are made up of two alleles. These are the alleles, okay? They're the genes that can be expressed. So in a homozygous individual, their genotype has two identical letters. So it would be something like this: two little b's or two big B's. You're going to see two of the same either way, whether it's homozygous recessive, because recessive are given the smaller case letters because they tend to hide. So this would be a homozygous recessive. This is a homozygous dominant because it has two. So therefore, heterozygous means that they have two different letters. So that simply means that whatever letters you're given, they're going to get one of each. Okay, so we have genotype, allele, phenotype, homozygous, and heterozygous. And you're going to see those terms quite a bit throughout this unit. Okay, so let's start off by working through the practice problem. I'm going to do number 1 as an example, and that should hopefully get you started for number 2 and 3. But number 1 is talking about pea plants, and it tells us that round are dominant over wrinkled. So that tells me that in the case of the R's, because that's what the book chose to use, therefore, since round are dominant, they're going to have a capital letter. Since, and you know what? Sometimes I like to do my little key here. You can write out a little key for yourself. Big R is round. Little r represents wrinkled. So in the case of a genotype, this is just a little side note, there are 3 possibilities. Somebody could be homozygous dominant and be round, but you could also be heterozygous, and because the big R wins, you would still be round. So the only way a P is going to be wrinkled is if it has 2 small R's. So that's where that comes from. But let's read the question. So it says, use a Punnett square to predict the phenotypic and genotypic outcome. So that's basically what could these children be. We're asking to almost predict, okay? Between a plant that is homozygous for round, so that tells me my first parent is homozygous round, and a plant homozygous for wrinkled. So you see homozygous means the same, but it's wrinkled. So it's going to, this is one parent, this is the second parent. So now I'm going to do a Punnett square. So this is what we call a monohybrid cross. So there are 4 offspring squares in the middle with a parent on the top and a parent on the side. So when I'm doing it, I find it's kind of like doing tic-tac-toes. So you can see I have 4 squares in the middle, and then I have squares over here that are going to allow my parents. So the law of segregation tells me that genes, remember when you did meiosis, half your genes come from your mom, half from your dad. So during meiosis, when sperm and egg are met, these will split and move and be inherited independently, okay? So that's why when I do this parent on the top, they're going to get one R here, the other big R here, because those are going to split. Here's my second parent, and this is a wrinkled P, little r, little r. All right, so once I have a parent here and a parent here, I'm going to figure out the genotypes of their possible children or offspring in here. How that works, I go one from the mom, one from the dad. And always put your big R first. It's a good habit because that denotes the dominant, okay? One from above, one from the side. So you notice how they're getting one from their mother, one from the father, one from the mother, one from the father. So now I have 4 children in here. If I look at my key, they're all what we would call heterozygous because they have one of each. And because the big R is dominant, and in this case, round are dominant. So my phenotypic ratio, remember phenotype describes the physical nature. So in this case, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 round P's. That's my phenotype. Now, if they were different, I would list them out. 2 round, 2 wrinkled, 3 round, so forth, whatever the case may be. And the genotypic ratio is where I'm actually going to be talking about the letters, the genotype. So in this case, I have 4 big R, little r. So that is number 1 done. So this is the prediction. I show the prediction in the square, and then this phenotypic and genotypic breakdown shows what could happen for the possible offspring. In number 2, you're going to find that they're talking about red versus yellow, but luckily it follows the same kind of suit. So red is going to be dominant over yellow. So any person with these genotypes is going to be red. And the only way you're going to be yellow is if you get 2 small r's. So it asks you in A, what is the appearance of the F1 generation? When you hear F1 generation, just think of that as being the very first children that are produced from the original parents. Like in this example, that was an F1. So you're going to cross the parents that they say. You have a homozygous red fruit. So I'll just get you set up for A. A homozygous red is crossed with a yellow. So the only, remember, notice how they don't say anything about the yellow? They don't say homozygous or heterozygous. And that's because we have to assume that the only way you are yellow is if you're like that. So you're going to do a square and set it up like that. And then I'll let you fill in the blanks. But this would be the F1 generation in here. And then B asks you to take the F2 generations if 2 plants from F1 are crossed. So you will then take one of these children, one of these children, and then cross them in a square, and that becomes the F2. So this is the F1, and when you cross those 2, it becomes the F2. And they're going to ask you about the genotypes and what are the phenotypes. So genotype is the letter combination, and phenotype is the physical. That's just one example, but we can definitely cover more as we go along.